Hello, good evening. This Thursday, the 16th of May, it's 22:16 my time, and it's perfect time to record because it's nice and quiet, no background noise. And I've been researching this presentation for you for the last 2 days, and it's about the pyramid on Mars, which is five-sided. It's called the D&M pyramid. The face on Mars and the floor plan, the remaining floor plan, the ruins of a city in this area called Cydonia, which is spelled Cydonia. And so there's been a lot of controversy about this. And when you do your research by Googling and using all the normal sites, and you go onto Wikipedia, you get the same waffle about this is controversial and we think this is actually just people's imagination, they want it to be a face and all the rest of it, paragolia, whatever it's called, whereby you seek shapes in clouds, tea leaves, etc. Well, actually it's all wrong. It is actually two faces in one, and it's linked to a code. Now, the first time NASA put a probe on the surface of Mars, the first thing it did, before even taking a picture, was test the atmosphere for methane. Not just any methane, a certain type of methane that only happens when you have an Earth-like atmosphere that has been subjected to enormous amounts of thermonuclear radiation. And the test came up positive. So first of all, there was life on Mars, there was water, and there was an Earth-like atmosphere. This is confirmed by the type of methane that NASA discovered. So, we know it was once inhabited. We know it was Earth-like, and we know that there was a thermonuclear war. This is not thermonuclear plasma popping out from a sun or a passing large object. There is only one type of methane that comes from a thermonuclear war. So that's the first thing, and that's very positive, in that we know that Mars was Earth-like. It had water, it had an atmosphere, and could support life, and we also have all these wonderful artifacts that prove it, despite the mainstream contra-argument, which is total waffle. Now, to give you an idea of how bad it is, Carl Sagan had a program back in the 70s which he used to present with an astronaut, a retired astronaut, called Mr. Price, who was very pro life in the universe, having been up there and having had experiences which he was very open about. He then found out that one of the pictures from Mars that they were going to present of the face on his program had actually been deliberately downgraded by Carl Sagan. As you can imagine, there was a big falling out between these two, and they both went their separate ways. And Mr. Price did express his great disappointment. So that's the only negative thing I'm going to inject into this podcast. The other stuff, and I have 6 pages here of notes, is all very positive. So, the face in size is 2.75 by 2.0 kilometers in size. We can't imagine how much stone was used yet, because we haven't got near enough to start getting any proper data to do an informed guesstimate. But just the floor plan gives you an idea that it's one big monument. We don't have the size of the five-sided pyramid in any reliable source, and I did spend several hours trying to find reliable and not guesstimate sizes of the five-sided pyramid. But I'll get back to the five-sided pyramid. The five-sided pyramid is actually nicknamed the D&M pyramid because back in the 70s, when the first pictures came back from Sardinia, it was two scientists working for JPL, Jet Propulsion Laboratories, which is part of NASA, Mr. DePietria and Mr. Greg Mollema, who actually noticed this and said this is rather interesting, so it became known as the D&M pyramid. So, it's a bit of culture there. So, what one has to understand about all pyramids, whether they're South American, Indonesian, certain temples in India, obviously the ones in Giza, and the other ones in Egypt, and the ones in China, the ones, the special mounds in North America, which haven't been excavated yet because there's a law against it, they all are based on tetrahedral mathematics. And it's also, we're looking at hyper-tetrahedron maths, which sounds very daunting, but actually it's basically about a triangle in a circle and the fact that certain energies come to the surface at 19.5 degrees, either north or south of the equator. Now, there's a whole load of stuff I've put in the description, but it's very interesting because there are 181 moons in our solar system, ours included. Now, ours is an artificial satellite, it is not natural. And there is a pyramid on the moon, which the Chinese lander discovered back in 2013. And they published the photos not only via the normal channels, but also by the website from the People's Liberation Army. And they even put in the screen at the bottom left-hand corner a tetrahedral triangle. And yes, the little pyramid on the moon, about which we haven't had a lot of information since, is at 19.5 degrees as well. Now, so that's very, very nice. So now, Jupiter has the red spot, which is 19.5 south of the equator. The spot is getting smaller very rapidly. We don't know why. We do know that our solar system, like the rest of the galaxy, is moving away from the center at approximately 70,000 miles per hour. We're all doing this together, and that we are going through different phases of energy, and we don't know what type of energies we're coming into contact with. We haven't got the instruments yet, and we're not necessarily posing the right questions. And of course, what we do know isn't necessarily disseminated. So, we have also the hexagon, which is at the North Pole of Saturn, and this is getting smaller as well, and there are also perturbations within this large hexagon, but it is still following its normal rotation, but it is getting smaller with these perturbations in the middle. Now, the other thing is that in Sardinia you have the pyramids, not just one, the five-sided one, but there's also a set of 3 pyramids, just like the ones at Giza, and they all line up with the Sirius constellation as well. And there is a special code which is discovered by Mr. Munck, a mathematical code, which I've put in the description. It's a long description this time, there's lots of stuff, which locks in all the pyramids on the moon, on Mars, on Earth. There's also on the Earth code, the fact that there is coincidence with ley lines as well. So we are looking at an electromagnetic network on the surface of the Earth, in the atmosphere, on the other planets and the satellite, the Moon, plus underground as well. And Mr. Munck, M-U-N-C-K, has spent 10 years on this. He started before the IT explosion, so there was a lot of maths by hand, and he has to be really congratulated on the excellence of his work. And what's more, he has made it very, very accessible. That's why I put it in the link. You will not fall over, right? Everything is explained stage by stage, and it's quite fascinating how everything is linked. And we can link Stonehenge to the pyramids in Giza, and Stonehenge to the wonderful statues in Easter Island, and Stonehenge to the pyramids in Central and Southern America. And there's all sorts of things that come out of this code. But the key is 2.72, which is the cosmic yard. Now, I call it a cosmic yard. It's not. I shouldn't. That's me. It is a special yard, not too far from the Sumerian yard, not too far from the Egyptian cubit, which basically gives you the key to the formulas. And you know when you're getting your geometry right or your maths right, because 2.72 keeps coming up. And also the decimal point can move, so you know, so long as you have 2.72, doesn't matter where your decimal point is, you're on the right track. So this is tetrahedral mathematics. So Voyager 2 went to have a look at Neptune, and Neptune does emit 3 times more energy than it receives from the sun. So it'd be very interesting to find out what's happening there. Okay, we have Mars, which has 2 little moons, and they are tiny little satellites. One is Phobos, one is Deimos, and the Russians had a run-in with that, which I can do another podcast on, because they lost an entire satellite and its lander, and they went up with another one, and they got a picture of an ET craft that they think may be responsible. Okay, so I've put Richard Hoagland in the description because he really is the expert on Mars. He's put in a fantastic team together, and his books are fascinating as well. I highly recommend that you get his books, but his podcasts are great. He's got a wonderful sense of humor, and he's thoroughly enjoyable and will make the subject very approachable. So there is in our galaxy, in our little solar system, one moon that, whilst it goes round in a clockwise direction, like most moons do around their host planets, this one, whilst going around clockwise, turns anti-clockwise on its own axis, right? So it's going around anti-clockwise. Don't ask me why, but the spin is always present. It's called the N effect, and once you get sufficiently fast spin, then you create a field. These are hyperdimensional fields, magnetics, and these can create gateways. So spin is also the way you control gravity. So the moon does not have a gravitational field, and NASA made a huge, huge mistake when they posed the question, what was the sound that the astronauts heard when they went around to the dark side of the moon for the first time on Apollo 10? And NASA replied, oh, that must be electromagnetic interference. Well, there can't be, because the moon doesn't have an electromagnetic field. Whereas Mars locally does, which means there are places without an electromagnetic field and there are places on Mars with, just as there are places on Mars with water and there are places on Mars without. However, lots of special satellites with their look-down technology, have come to the conclusion that there could be a very large underwater table on Mars, which is why we see these little puddles of water everywhere. Nothing's been confirmed yet. So, the face on Mars is actually a sphinx with two heads, not one, and there's a way of looking at it. If you cut it in half north to south and mirror it, you get a hominid and a lion, or a feline face. And if you cut it vertically and mirror it, you get the feline face. Then you look at the mathematics of where it is in relation to its own pyramids on its own planet, and you get the same mathematics as you do on the Giza Plateau. And so it goes, especially with the pyramids and their relationship and their positioning with the Sirius constellation. So, everything is a golden ratio, not only on Cydonia but also on the Giza Plateau. There's a constant ratio. All right, the N effect, we've done that. 180 moons, we've done that. Right, our two planets, Mars and Earth, are linked by the mathematics, as are the monuments. And it's basically E plus pi gives you the hyperdimensional physics. We use holograms for storing, which is why crystals are very important. Mr. Munk's mathematics are absolutely fantastic. He's given us the global grid and an interplanetary grid. And if you look at Avebury and Silbury, once again, they're at 19.5 degrees. They lock in Stonehenge. They match the size and the proportions. It gives us this megalith. They give us this megalithic yard yet again of 2.72 centimeters, but the decimal point once again. And you can understand much better the mathematics of certain crop circles that we've received over the years that have nothing to do with Doug and Dave after they've been to the pub. Okay, now, what else? All right. So, what is very important to retain is that the pyramids on Mars, the floor plan, which is exactly the same floor plan as ancient Baghdad, the old Baghdad we have on Earth, exactly the same. You can overlay them, they match perfectly. They're all linked in to the same mathematics. Thanks to Mr. Munk, we discovered this. Second thing is that Mars did have an Earth-like atmosphere, and we have the proof because it was the first thing that NASA checked when they landed there back in the early 70s, 76 I think it was, and that we have all these monuments. Now it's very interesting because Mr. Hoagland and the Enterprise Foundation did a huge national petition asking NASA to land one of their little rovers or curiosities or one of those instruments on Mars, but in Cydonia, so that they could actually get a proper idea of the size, get some proper pictures, do some more calculations. NASA resisted this right up until the last moment where they acquiesced publicly. They then did a subsequent launch, and informed the world that the mission had technical problems and couldn't land in Cydonia. Also, NASA stopped all live feed from the space station, the ISS, a long time ago. because they kept seeing visitors shooting across the screen, but we have lots and lots of images of those already. But even their Curiosity and their rovers and their other ones have taken pictures of glowing objects going across the horizon at high speed. Now, the other thing is that, and this is going back to 2013, 2014, we have a picture of someone sitting on a rock taken by one of these robots, and the person sitting on the rock would appear to have reddish hair, would appear to be wearing a green dress, and would appear to be either using a powder puff or their mobile phone. We also have another picture of a family and an entrance to a cave, and they look perfectly normal. They're not with wild hair, they're not covered in hair, they are dressed in clothes, and the male is clean shaven, and everybody looks surprisingly humanoid. And these are the images, NASA's own images that have come out. We also have wonderful pictures of some very, very Egyptian looking like structures as well. So, apart from the pyramids, but some nice sculptures which have come out, which are very hard to find on the internet. I spent hours and hours trying to find them, and I do have them saved in a laptop which is not with me anymore, and I might be able to recuperate those, and if I do, I will broadcast them, because it really is nice. Now, what no one is talking about on the internet is that there is a small asteroid belt around Mars, because Mars either had a very large moon, nothing to do with Phobos and Deimos, much bigger, larger than our moon, or it was a sister planet. And I presume, I might be presuming too much, but my estimation is that during this thermonuclear war conflagration, that planet or moon was totally destroyed, which is why we have bits of Mars and other bits strewn all over our planet, mainly at the poles, and which is why there is this small asteroid belt around Mars. Now, I found it quite amusing when I was listening to Richard Hoagland again preparing this, that to him it would not surprise him at all if there was a scenario from the Schwarzenegger film Total Recall, whereas we find out that Mars does have an atmosphere and water, and that it's all underground. I thought that was quite cool. But the maths confirm everything. The methane confirms everything. Now, I don't think I've ranted on about thermonuclear and the dangers of thermonuclear enough. But ever since World War II, and we're now in year 2023, we have exploded over 2,000 thermonuclear devices, not only on the surface of the planet, under the ocean, under the ground, and yes, even in space. Now, I can't think of anything more irresponsible than exploding a thermonuclear device in space when you don't know what's going to happen. And if you listen to ETs who come down and speak to contactees and say, you may not know this, but you rip through loads of dimensions elsewhere every time you blow up a thermonuclear device. So it's not just your planet. That comes across a lot. And my friend Preston Dennett has loads and loads of contactee evidence to this effect. And he's one of the few researchers who genuinely does listen to his contactees. Now, the other thing about thermonuclear devices is that we actually have 50 we can't account for. We don't know where they are. Does that make you feel safe? Doesn't make me feel safe at all. And with what's happening in the Ukraine and the current situation with someone with dementia in the White House, that doesn't make me feel safe at all either. So I think we're going to have to, as humans, regardless of our race, colour or creed, regardless of our nationality, agree on one thing, that if there's going to be wars, it's only conventional weapons. We just dismantle the nuclear weapons, put them away, we send inspectors out to make sure that they are dismantled, that the waste is being disposed of properly, and God knows how we're going to do that, but we will find a way. And we also, at the same time, just stop with conventional energy solutions. We don't need nuclear for energy. We have something called zero-point energy. I've done a podcast on this. Please do have a look at that. You can also look up Nikola Tesla, which I put in the description in my podcast. But you see, all these ancient civilizations, they had all this technology. They had the zero-point energy. They had thermonuclear weapons. And the technology went far in advance, obviously, of their morality, their ethics, and their spirituality. And when one listens to the contactees, this is consistently and systematically the same message. Please evolve. Stop fighting each other. Stop polluting your planet. And so on, and so on. It's the same message. Now we have everything at our disposal to stop polluting the planet immediately. We can progressively become more vegetarian. People at my age, I don't think are going to be able to handle it, but when we reincarnate, our parents will probably be feeding us 90% vegetarian, which is fine, So, we have to just knock the thermonuclear toys on the head, with stop polluting the planet, and then we have to start talking to each other as opposed to fighting one another. I remember the motto of the BBC over Bush House. It was, nations shall speak peace unto nation. Well, I think it's about time nation did speak peace unto nation. Proxy wars only make the bankers and the arms manufacturers rich. And that's it. So, enjoy looking up everything on the description. Richard Hoagland is very amusing as well. Mr. Monk takes you through things very, very gently, so you will understand the mathematics, and it is, even I can get my head around it. And I am learning to edit, so I can then do nice diagrams and pictures, and I have to then be careful about copyright and things like that. So my next few podcasts will be interspersed with illustrations and all sorts of nice things. And I would like to thank Preston Dennett for his patience, because we had loads of technical problems doing our transatlantic interview, and I have still the recordings, and I'm still working out getting lessons in how to edit these, put it together into one long cohesive interview. I would like to thank all the viewers for watching, because we did have at least 7 minutes of good interview, and he did have a really good message, so once again thank you all for that. And I hope that this podcast on Mars will open new avenues of thought for you and reinforce that which you already knew and inspire you to go forth and explore and enjoy. And it is a question of enjoyment. Thank you all very much. Have a good evening. Good night.